Calix Hargrove leaned against the grimy hull of his beaten-up transport. Junk heap, which in retrospect was a bit on the nose. He'd been posing as a trader at the Black Market Arms Depot for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of pretending he could haggle in a dozen alien languages while avoiding the urge to puke at the smell of fish guts mixed with burnt ozone that clung to the place. The depot bustled with activity, a veritable zoo of creatures that ranged from the vaguely humanoid to the downright unsettling. He'd give anything for a decent burger, but the closet of a cafe here only offered things that looked like they might scurry off your plate if you weren't quick. The place was a hub of illicit activity, where the galaxy's unsavory types came to swap, sell, and sometimes just flaunt their ill-gotten tech. If it had a circuit board, it could probably be found here, usually with a few extra features that would make it highly illegal in any civilized system. Not that this depot was anywhere close to civilized. It was more like a junkyard with aspirations, a kind of galactic flea market for the morally flexible. "Hey, Calix," barked a voice that sounded like gravel gargling whiskey. It belonged to a hulking creature with 3 eyes and no concept of personal space. "Got any of those human trinkets?" 3-Eye, as Calix had unimaginatively nicknamed him, was always on the lookout for human artifacts. For some reason, the galaxy's most dangerous armament enthusiasts had developed a soft spot for Earth junk. "Sorry, 3-Eye," Calix replied with a shrug that implied he didn't care at all. "Fresh out of paper clips and rubber bands. Maybe next time." Calix's grin was all teeth, the kind that promised nothing and delivered even less. 3-Eye grumbled something that could have been a racial slur or a compliment and lumbered off, leaving Calix to his real mission: find out what all the fuss was about. Rumor had it, there was a new player in town, one with plans that stretched beyond your average arms deal. As he wandered the stalls, he kept his ears open and his expression deliberately vacant, a trick he'd perfected as a teenager when explaining to teachers why his homework was invariably late. "Psst, Calix," a voice whispered, dragging him into a shadowy corner where the flickering light barely reached. The speaker was a jittery rodent-like alien named Snive, who had a talent for obtaining information, assuming he wasn't too high on his own supply to communicate. "What is it, Snive? I'm not in the mood for your I saw something shiny stories," Calix said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, his patience thinner than a starving flea. No, this is big," Snive insisted, his eyes darting around like he was expecting the shadows to sprout arms and strangle him. "That new surveillance network, the one everyone's whispering about, it's here. And here I thought I'd die of boredom today," Calix replied, though his interest was genuinely piqued. "What do you know?" "Not much. Just that it's some kind of Big Brother thing, meant to keep tabs on humans specifically," Snive said, his whiskers twitching nervously. "Why do I get the feeling we're about to become the galaxy's favorite reality show?" Calix mused, a grin tugging at his lips despite the grim implications. The idea of being monitored by aliens was a nightmare wrapped in a tinfoil hat conspiracy. "What are they planning to do with this network? I mean, besides the obvious spy on humanity and make us dance for them?" Calix asked, scratching his chin like he actually had a plan and wasn't just winging it at this point. "Control, man. Power." Snive lowered his voice, his nervousness turning his words into a jittery staccato. "Whoever controls the network controls the humans." "Great," Calix sighed, rubbing his temples. "I always wanted to be a puppet. Guess it's time for me to become a real boy." His sarcasm was as thick as the tension hanging in the air. "You gotta do something, Calix," Snive urged, his desperation palpable. "You're the only one crazy enough to try, crazy being the operative word." "Why me again?" Calix asked, looking around at the bustling depot, half expecting to spot glowing eyes peering out from the shadows. "Because you're human," Snive replied, as if that explained everything. "And here I was thinking it was my charming personality," Calix said, rolling his eyes. "All right, fine, I'll see what I can dig up." He left Snive to his twitching paranoia and made his way deeper into the depot. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel and desperation. Calyx pushed through the crowd, sidestepping a couple of bipedal lizards arguing over the price of a plasma rifle, with only slightly less civility than your average bar fight. His destination was a stall at the far end of the depot, run by a creature that was more machine than flesh. It went by the name of Cog, and if anyone had information worth selling, it was Cog. The trick was making sure you didn't end up owing more than you could pay. Well, if it isn't the galaxy's favorite underdog, Cog greeted him, its voice a smooth metallic purr. What brings you to my humble abode, Calyx? Looking to swap stories or just add some new scars to that pretty face? Maybe a bit of both, Calyx replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Heard you might know something about this new surveillance gig. Sounds like the kind of thing you'd have your claws in. Oh, it's more than just a gig, my friend, Cog said, its lenses focusing on Calyx with unsettling precision. The network's a masterpiece of control designed to keep your kind in check. As if being an underpaid, underappreciated jack-of-all-trades wasn't enough, Calyx muttered, his voice laced with sarcasm. So, what's the plan? They gonna start charging us for breathing next? That'd be the smart play, Cog replied, a hint of a laugh in its synthesized voice. But no, it's about influence. Monitoring communications, tracking movements, even influencing decisions if necessary. Sounds like a sleepover with my ex, except slightly less terrifying, Calyx quipped, his mind racing with the implications. You're gonna need help, Cog said, one of its mechanical fingers tapping a rhythm on the counter. Information like this isn't cheap and you'll need allies. Allies, Calyx repeated, as if trying the word on for size. I'm used to working alone, less messy that way. Mess is inevitable, Calyx, Cog replied, a sharp edge to its words. The question is, how much are you willing to risk to clean it up? Story of my life, Calyx said with a resigned huff. Fine, I'll see what I can do. But if I end up in pieces, I'm coming back to haunt you. Wouldn't have it any other way, Cog said, its laughter trailing after Calyx as he walked away. As he slipped through the crowd, Calyx couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was about to drop another load of cosmic excrement on him. Surveilled, tracked, manipulated. What a time to be alive. At least he'd have a front-row seat to humanity's latest unexpected challenge. The only question was whether he'd survive long enough to enjoy the show. The depot buzzed with the electric hum of illicit dealings, the air charged with a palpable tension that Calyx had learned to navigate with the ease of a cat burglar tiptoeing through a jewelry store. He paused, taking a moment to survey the chaotic tapestry of intergalactic commerce laid out before him. Hey, Hargrove! A voice called out from a nearby stall, interrupting his thoughts. It was Rock, a grizzled veteran of the mercenary circuit who looked like he'd lost a fight with a tractor and come out the winner through sheer spite. Rock, Calyx acknowledged, a wry smile curling at his lips. Still hustling stolen tech like it's going out of fashion. Someone's gotta fund my retirement, Rock replied, grinning through a face full of scars. What's this I hear about you and some galactic conspiracy? Oh, just the usual, me against the universe, Calyx said, shrugging as if it were all in a day's work. Seems like someone wants to add Puppet to the list of jobs I didn't apply for, Rock chuckled, a deep growl of a laugh that suggested he was no stranger to cosmic ironies. Well, if you need someone to watch your back, you know where to find me. Appreciate it, Calyx replied, genuinely touched. In the meantime, keep an eye out for any suspicious characters. In this place, Rock snorted. They're all suspicious. Exactly, Calyx said, glancing over the crowd one last time before slipping away into the shadows. He hadn't gone far when he felt a hand on his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. He turned around to find himself face to face with a slender, silver-skinned alien whose eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. You're Calyx Hargrove, the alien stated, its voice a melodious whisper that carried an edge of authority. Depends who's asking, Calyx replied, his expression neutral despite the unease coiling in his gut. My name is Seraphiz, the alien said, its gaze unflinching. I represent interests that align with your own. Do they now? Calix asked, raising an eyebrow. And what interest might those be? Preventing the deployment of the surveillance network, Seraphis said simply, as if discussing the weather. Funny. I was just thinking the same thing, Calix said, his mind racing with possibilities. Looks like I've got myself a party after all. Then let us proceed, Seraphis said, turning on its heel and gliding through the crowd with Calix following close behind. For the first time in what felt like forever, Calix felt a flicker of hope, even if it was tempered by the cold reality of their situation. He was stepping into a storm, but at least he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to turn the tide. Strolling through the depot's labyrinth of shady stalls, Calix Hargrove felt like a moth in a flame factory. Adrenaline buzzed in his veins, not because he was in any real danger yet, but because he knew it was only a matter of time before he stepped on the wrong set of toes, alien, mechanical, or otherwise. Seraphis led him toward a secluded corner of the depot, where the glaring lights gave way to shadows darker than an accountant's soul. The air was thick with the smell of burnt circuitry and ambition gone awry. Now, if only he could navigate this potential minefield without getting his head blown off or worse, indebted to someone with a ledger as long as their grudge. Calix shoved his hands into his pockets, trying to look more confident than he felt. So, Seraphis, about this network. Just how screwed are we? Depends, Seraphis replied, a smirk barely visible in the dim light. On whether you humans can still pull off that erratic thing you're known for, unpredictability, chaos, general disregard for authority. Oh, we've still got it, Calix assured. Though I hear it's not as fashionable as it used to be. Fashionable or not, it's exactly what we need, Seraphis said, stopping in front of a battered door that looked like it had seen more action than a backup dancer at a galactic pop concert. Calix leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So what's the plan? Walk in, take selfies with the surveillance tech, and hope they like us enough to shut it down, Seraphis chuckled, a sound like tinkling metal. Not quite. The network's weakness lies in its predictability, or rather, its developers' inability to anticipate human variables. They've programmed it to handle everything but the one thing it can't. Our tendency to do the unexpected. Sounds like they haven't met my Uncle Reg, Calix muttered. But I'm listening. The network is designed to analyze patterns, predict behaviors, and control outcomes, Seraphis explained. However, it struggles with improvisation and illogical actions, which, as you know, is where you come in. Calix raised a skeptical eyebrow. So you want me to outweird the universe's most sophisticated surveillance system? In a manner of speaking, yes, Seraphis replied, their expression unreadable. While it's focused on predicting and controlling, a human presence introduces an element of chaos it can't handle. Just call me the cosmic monkey wrench, Calix said, a sardonic grin plastered on his face. But how exactly do I throw this proverbial wrench without getting welded to the nearest wall? We'll have to be subtle, Seraphis admitted, as if the word tasted foreign. The enforcers are on high alert and they won't tolerate disruptions. Guess I'll have to tone down my natural charisma, Calix deadpanned. Wouldn't want to cause a riot. Stay close, Seraphis instructed, leading the way through a hidden passage that seemed to exist solely for those in the know, or those desperate enough to find it. With the depot's bustling chaos fading behind them, Calix found himself in a cramped corridor lined with dilapidated equipment that had seen better centuries. The walls hummed with the distant thrum of machinery, the air heavy with the metallic tang of oil and regret. Cozy, Calix remarked, his voice echoing softly. If I'd known we'd be touring the armpits of the galaxy, I'd have brought a camera. Focus, Calix, Seraphis chided, though there was a hint of amusement in their tone. Right. So what's our next move? Calix asked, peering into the shadows for any signs of alien enforcers ready to pounce. We need to access the network's core without drawing attention, Seraphis explained. Its main terminal is secure, but there are peripheral nodes that offer a less guarded entry point. And how do we reach these nodes without tripping over some cosmic tripwire? Calix asked, mentally cataloging all the ways this could go spectacularly wrong. By blending in, Seraphis replied. Act as though you belong and most will overlook you, Calix snorted. Blending in is my specialty. Just ask anyone who's ever been surprised by me at a family reunion. They continued down the corridor until it opened into a cavernous room dominated by a bewildering array of consoles and displays. The place buzzed with activity, various alien species moving with purpose, their attention focused on the tasks at hand. See that? Seraphis gestured toward a console near the back, half obscured by a hulking storage unit. That's our entry point, subtle as a space station in a cornfield, but I'll take it, Calix quipped, already mapping out his path through the crowd. As they made their way across the room, Calix couldn't help but notice the tension in the air, a palpable undercurrent of suspicion and control. The aliens moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their expressions grim and determined. All right, Seraphis, Calix muttered under his breath. How do we make our move without ending up on some intergalactic most wanted list? Simple, Seraphis replied, their voice barely above a whisper. Act as though you're performing routine maintenance. The network's creators are arrogant in their design. They don't believe anything can slip through their net. Arrogance, Calix mused. The universe's oldest Achilles heel. They reached the terminal and Calix took a deep breath, fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. The interface glowed with a welcoming blue light, as if daring him to uncover its secrets. You've got this, Seraphis encouraged, their gaze scanning the room for any signs of unwanted attention. Yeah, Calix muttered, focusing on the task at hand. Just like hacking into the school's cafeteria menu back in the day. Only now, instead of free pudding, I'm getting a headache. He worked quickly, navigating the system's labyrinthine security protocols with the finesse of a cat burglar at a jewelry exposition. Each line of code was a potential trap, each keystroke a gamble. Finally, a soft chime signaled success. We're in, Calix whispered, a triumphant grin lighting up his face. Now what now? We introduce a little chaos, Seraphis replied, a mischievous glint in their eyes. With a few deft movements, Calix initiated a series of random commands, his actions deliberately erratic. The system reacted with confusion, its programming struggling to adapt to the unexpected input. Just like that time I tried to teach my cat to fetch, Calix said, his tone dry. Only this time, I'm the one doing the fetching. The displays flickered, their readouts fluctuating wildly as they attempted to compensate for the unforeseen variables. Around them, the aliens continued their work, oblivious to the subtle sabotage unfolding under their noses. Now we wait, Seraphis said, their expression one of cautious optimism. Calix nodded, feeling the adrenaline settle into a familiar rhythm. And hope this doesn't blow up in our faces. Hope is for the unprepared, Seraphis replied, a wry smile playing at their lips. We have something better, perspective, huh? Calix mused, leaning back against the console. I guess that'll have to do. They remained at the terminal, watching the chaos unfold, the network's once perfect harmony unraveling into discord. For the first time in a long while, Calix felt a spark of satisfaction, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they were making a difference. Well, this is fun, Calix remarked, his tone laced with irony. But what's our exit strategy? We slip out the way we came in, Seraphis replied. With any luck, our handiwork will keep them occupied long enough for us to make a clean getaway. Luck, chaos, perspective. I'm starting to see a pattern here, Calix said, shaking his head in bemusement. Let's hope the universe is feeling generous today. Together, they retraced their steps, navigating the chaotic room with practiced ease. The system's flickering displays cast erratic shadows, the one-sorted room now a swirling mass of confusion. As they slipped back into the corridor, Calix couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting an alarm to sound or an enforcer to materialize out of thin air. But the depot remained blissfully ignorant, the chaos they'd unleashed spreading through the network like a virus. For now, at least, they were safe. "Looks like our gamble paid off," Seraphis said, a hint of relief in their voice. "Yeah, but let's not break out the victory champagne just yet," Calix cautioned. "We still have to get out of here in one piece." They made their way back through the depot, blending into the ebb and flow of commerce once more. Calix kept his eyes peeled for any signs of trouble, his senses heightened by the thrill of their recent success. "Hey, Hargrove," a familiar voice called out, breaking through his thoughts. Calix turned to find 3i looming behind a cluttered stall, its 3 eyes blinking in a synchronous amusement. 3i. "Fancy seeing you here. Word on the street is you've been busy," 3i said, its voice a deep rumble. "Something about a network and a little human ingenuity. Just trying to keep things interesting," Calix replied, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "Well, if you're looking for a place to lay low, I've got a spot in mind," 3i offered, its expression unreadable. "Appreciate it," Calix said, nodding in gratitude. "We might just take you up on that." They parted ways, Calix and Seraphis slipping back into the crowded throng. The depot buzzed with activity, the familiar hum of illicit commerce a comforting backdrop to their escape. As they made their way toward the exit, Calix couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. The danger was far from over, the challenge still looming large. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he had allies, a purpose, and, most importantly, a plan. "Well, Seraphis," Calix said, his voice tinged with irony. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us." "Indeed," Seraphis replied, their gaze meeting his with a mixture of determination and wry amusement. "But with a little chaos on our side, who knows what we might achieve?" With that, they stepped into the depot's swirling crowd, the weight of their mission hanging over them like a storm cloud waiting to burst. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. And in the grand tapestry of cosmic chaos, Calix Hargrove was more than ready to play his part. Calix Hargrove had always felt at ease in places like the depot, a testament to his questionable life choices if there ever was one. But now he was acutely aware of the fact that the same chaos that usually kept him safely camouflaged was about to turn on him with the enthusiasm of an overeager bloodhound. "Time to blend, huh?" he muttered to himself, eyes scanning the crowd for a place to disappear. But blending in was harder than usual when a group of alien mercenaries were sniffing around for the source of the chaos he'd so eagerly introduced. "Blend like a steak in a vegan convention," he grumbled, ducking behind a stall that seemed to be selling what looked like electronic entrails. The stall owner, a scaly creature with a face only a mother could love, if that mother was blind, eyed him suspiciously but said nothing. Seraphis was at his side, their expression one of forced nonchalance. "Calix, those aren't your usual fans," they murmured, gesturing ever so slightly at a group of heavily armed beasts prowling through the crowd with the grace of a drunk rhinoceros. "Yeah, I got that," Calix replied, his voice low. "They look about as happy as cats in a rainstorm." Seraphis raised an eyebrow. "You have a lot of experience with cats in rainstorms." "Metaphorically," Calix shot back, peering around the stall. "I think it's time for a strategic withdrawal." "Running away," Seraphis teased, but their eyes were serious. "Retreating with style," Calix corrected. "There's a difference." He ducked low, weaving through the crowded aisles with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime avoiding the wrong kind of attention. The mercenaries were gaining, and he needed a distraction. "I need something flashy," he thought out loud, eyes darting from stall to stall, scanning for anything that screamed, "Look at me." His gaze fell on a stack of malfunctioning hover drones, buzzing like angry bees denied their nectar. "Perfect," he grinned, making his way over to the drones. His fingers danced over the controls with an ease born of countless hours spent tinkering with junkyard relics. Within moments, the drones sprang to life, their lights flashing erratically. "You know, I've always wanted to be a conductor," Calix mused, directing the drones to swarm toward the mercenaries, their circuits whirring in a chaotic symphony. The mercenaries, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught of malfunctioning machines, flailed wildly. The drones had a penchant for attaching themselves to anything moving, and the mercenaries made perfect targets. "This is our cue," Calix said, grabbing Seraphiz by the arm. They sprinted through the depot, avoiding the occasional flying drone as the chaos spread behind them. "You're surprisingly good at this," Seraphiz noted, a hint of admiration in their voice. "Years of practice," Calix quipped, skidding to a halt as they reached a particularly dense knot of market stalls. "And an innate talent for getting into trouble. What's next on your list of questionable decisions?" Seraphiz asked, their eyes scanning the area for escape routes. Calix shrugged. "Figured I'd improvise," he said, his eyes landing on a heap of scrap metal that could generously be called a barricade. "We need to buy time." Seraphiz nodded, their gaze resolute. "I'll help." Together they worked to pile debris in the path of the approaching mercenaries, their hands moving frantically. Calix spared a moment to glance at his temporary ally. "You know, if this whole guiding thing doesn't work out, you've got a future in demolition." "I'll keep that in mind," Seraphiz replied dryly, sweat glistening on their brow. The barricade completed, if a haphazard pile of junk could be called that, they retreated once more, moving deeper into the depot's maze-like corridors. "So what's the plan when they inevitably bulldoze through that impressive wall of garbage?" Seraphiz asked, breathless but steady. "Well," Calix said, thinking on his feet, "I figured we could use a classic, the all bait and switch." "Care to elaborate?" "Simple," Calix replied, his voice brimming with misplaced confidence. "We lead them in circles until they get dizzy and give up, or pass out." Seraphiz snorted, unable to hide their amusement. "That's your plan." "Improvisation," Calix reminded them. "It's a lost art." They ducked into a narrow passageway, the shadows swallowing them whole. The sound of mercenary boots echoed faintly, a reminder that their current peace was temporary at best. "I'll say this for them," Calix muttered, "they are persistent." "Hardly a compliment," Seraphiz observed, "when your persistence is in direct opposition to our continued existence." "Fair point," Calix conceded, pausing at an intersection. "Left or right?" "Right," Seraphiz decided, leading the way with purpose. Calix followed, trusting their instincts. The corridor twisted and turned, a labyrinth designed by someone with a deep-seated hatred for straight lines. He stumbled over a loose floor panel, barely catching himself before his nose met the ground. "Who designs these places?" he grumbled, straightening up. "A drunk architect." "In fairness," Seraphiz replied, "it's supposed to be disorienting." "Mission accomplished," Calix said, rubbing his sore toe. The sound of pursuit was closer now, the mercenaries closing the gap. The sense of impending doom was familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Calix drew a deep breath, his mind racing for a way out. "There's an access hatch up ahead," Seraphiz said, pointing to a shadowy alcove. "If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them." "Might," Calix echoed, eyebrows raised. "No guarantees in this line of work," Seraphiz shot back, already moving toward the alcove. With no alternatives, Calix followed, mentally preparing for yet another mad dash. The hatch was corroded, its surface pitted with age and neglect. Calix pulled a multitool from his belt, working to pry the hatch open. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," he muttered, exerting all his weight against the lever. The hatch groaned in protest before giving way with a reluctant screech. "After you," Calix said, gesturing grandly to Seraphiz. "How chivalrous," Seraphiz replied dryly, slipping through the narrow opening. Calix was right behind them, pulling the hatch closed just as the first mercenary rounded the corner. The cover clanged shut, muffling the sounds of pursuit. "Well, that was close," Calix said, catching his breath in the dimly lit crawlspace. "I'd call it too close," Seraphiz replied, their voice echoing off the metal walls. "All part of the adventure," Calix said, peering down the narrow passage. "So, where does this conveniently placed tunnel lead?" "To a maintenance alcove," Seraphiz replied, consulting a mental map. "With any luck, it'll be unoccupied." "And if it's not?" Calix asked, crawling forward with all the grace of a drunken centipede. Then we'll improvise, Seraphis said, shooting him a wry smile. Calix chuckled, their earlier banter lightening the weight of their current predicament. They crawled in silence, the only sound the faint hum of electrical systems and the distant, muffled curses of frustrated mercenaries. The crawlspace opened into a small chamber, lined with the kind of outdated equipment that gave even Calix's junk heap a run for its money. "Home sweet home," Calix remarked, looking around the cramped space. "Temporary at best," Seraphis reminded him, already examining the room's exits. "Temporary works for me," Calix replied, taking a moment to catch his breath. "So any grand plans for our next move?" Seraphis considered, their gaze thoughtful. "We need to find transport, something fast with enough firepower to deter pursuit." "I like the way you think," Calix said, nodding appreciatively. "But where do we find something like that?" "There are a few hangars nearby," Seraphis explained. "We can try our luck there." "Luck's been a mixed bag today," Calix noted, his tone wry. "True," Seraphis agreed. "But it's better than sitting here waiting for them to find us." Calix sighed, acknowledging the truth of their words. "All right," he said, standing up. "Let's go steal ourselves a ride." The maintenance alcove had a discreet exit, likely intended for the convenience of engineers rather than fugitives. Calix led the way, moving with a cautious urgency that he hoped would keep them one step ahead of their pursuers. The depot's layout was a tangled web of passages and chambers, each one a potential hiding spot or trap. Calix's mind raced as he tried to anticipate the mercenaries' movements, his thoughts a jumble of half-formed plans and wild gambles. "How much farther?" Calix asked, glancing back at Seraphis. "Not far," Seraphis replied, their voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Just around this next corner." Calix nodded, his grip tightening on the multitool still clutched in his hand. He'd have preferred a plasma pistol, but beggars couldn't be choosers. The hangar was larger than he'd expected, a cavernous space filled with ships in various states of repair. Calix's eyes widened as he took in the array of vessels, each one a potential escape route and a potential target. "Now this is more like it," Calix said, a grin spreading across his face. "Focus, Calix," Seraphis chided, though their tone was more amused than annoyed. "We need something with speed and firepower." Right, Calix agreed, scanning the hangar with renewed purpose. His gaze settled on a sleek craft, its matte black hull gleaming ominously in the hangar's harsh lights. "What about that one?" Calix suggested, pointing to the ship with the kind of hopeful optimism usually reserved for lottery tickets and blind dates. Seraphis considered, their expression thoughtful. "It'll do," they decided, already moving toward the ship. Calix followed, his excitement tempered by the awareness that their pursuers could arrive at any moment. The ship's boarding ramp was lowered, as if inviting them to make a quick getaway. "Convenient," Calix remarked, ascending the ramp with a wary eye on the hangar entrance. "Let's just hope it starts," Seraphis replied, settling into the pilot's seat with the ease of someone who knew what they were doing. Calix slid into the co-pilot's chair, his fingers dancing over the controls with an enthusiasm born of desperation. The ship hummed to life, its engines thrumming with power. "All right," Calix said, a grin tugging at his lips. "Let's get the hell out ta here." The ship lifted off, the hangar's heavy doors sliding open to reveal the vast expanse of space beyond. Calix felt a surge of exhilaration as they shot into the void, the mercenaries' shouts fading into insignificance behind them. "Well," Calix said, leaning back in his seat with a satisfied sigh, "that was fun." "Fun," Seraphis echoed, their tone dry. "Not exactly the word I'd use." Calix chuckled, his earlier tension dissipating in the face of their successful escape. "You know, Seraphis," he said, "I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership." Seraphis glanced at him, a wry smile playing on their lips. "Let's survive long enough to see if that's true." "Fair enough," Calix agreed, his gaze fixed on the stars stretching out before them. The depot, the mercenaries, and the chaos they'd unleashed were behind them now, but he knew better than to think their troubles were over. Still, with the open skies ahead and a capable ally by his side, Calix found himself feeling something he hadn't in a long time. Hope, or maybe just a good old-fashioned adrenaline high. Either way, he was ready for whatever came next. The stars gleamed like indifferent spectators as Calix and Seraphis hurtled through the void, their stolen ship purring along like a well-fed alley cat. Which, given their history, was a minor miracle in itself. Calix was savoring the moment, his grin about as wide as the escape hatch they'd barely slipped through. "Okay," Calix said, tapping a panel that looked like it might eject them into space if he touched it wrong. "We've got ourselves a ship, a sky full of possibilities, and an entire syndicate probably sharpening their knives for us." "What now?" "Now," Seraphis replied, eyes on the display screens. "We find allies before those knife-loving maniacs do." Calix nodded, his mind racing through a mental Rolodex of every shady character he'd ever met. A real who's who of the galaxy's least desirable. Right, allies. The kind who are too busy being disreputable to stab us in the back. A beeping sound erupted from the console, an indicator light flashing with enough urgency to suggest it might need a cigarette break afterward. Seraphis frowned at the display. "Looks like our ship isn't as inconspicuous as we'd hoped," they said. "We've been tagged." "Tagged? As in, come and get us, we're right here tagged." "Exactly." Calix leaned back, his chair creaking in protest. "Perfect. Just means we need to act faster." "Act faster, plan smarter," Seraphis said, their voice a mix of determination and impending doom. "Got any friends who aren't actively trying to kill you?" Calix scratched his chin thoughtfully. "There's Vekrol. He runs a black market trading hub out in the asteroid belt. Not exactly a friend, more like a former business associate who hasn't threatened me in recent memory." "Sounds promising," Seraphis said, setting a course. "Let's see if we can leverage our mutual irritations with the syndicate into something helpful." The journey through the asteroid belt was smoother than Calix expected, given that smooth wasn't exactly the word he'd used for his life lately. The trading hub loomed ahead, an unassuming jumble of metal and wires masquerading as a legitimate operation amidst the floating debris. As they touched down, the ship's boarding ramp lowered with a hiss, like it was venting its own brand of disdain for the situation. Calix and Seraphis descended, eyeing the mismatched collection of traders, mercenaries, and swindlers who populated the hub. The place was a hodgepodge of species and styles, like a galactic thrift store where everyone was in on the joke. The air was thick with the scent of desperation and engine oil. "Welcome to Vekrol's emporium of questionable goods," Calix said, gesturing grandly to the chaos. "Everything's for sale, including your integrity." They navigated through the crowd, dodging persistently hovering drones and the occasional drunken patron. Vekrol was easy to spot, a towering figure with skin like crumpled parchment, his two eyes a piercing shade of green that suggested he'd seen everything and forgotten nothing. "Calix Hargrove," Vekrol boomed, his voice a low rumble that could have doubled as a ship's engine. "Didn't expect to see your sorry face here. What brings you to my humble establishment?" "Needed a break from the usual routine of running for my life," Calix replied, offering a lopsided smile. "Heard you might be in the business of making new friends." Vekrol chuckled, a sound like gravel being chewed. "Depends on the kind of friends you're looking for. The kind who don't mind poking a stick at the syndicate," Seraphis said, cutting to the chase. Vekrol raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Ah, the syndicate. You've been making waves, I hear. Disrupted a major arms deal, didn't you?" Calix shrugged, doing his best to look innocent. "Can't help it if I've got a gift for irritating powerful entities." Vekrol leaned back, considering. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. And a knack for finding trouble." "Comes naturally," Calix said. The older trader tapped his chin. "I might know a few people who'd be interested in a little pushback against the syndicate's stranglehold. But you'll need to convince them your plan isn't just a quick way to get us all killed. We can be very persuasive," Seraphis assured him, "especially when our lives are on the line." "All right," Vekrol said, nodding slowly. Let me make some introductions. The introductions were made in a cramped back room filled with the kind of second-hand smoke that clung to everything like a bad habit. The assembled group was a collection of traders, engineers, and assorted misfits, all with grievances against the syndicate as varied as their backgrounds. "So," said a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic arm that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, "you really plan to take on the syndicate?" "More like annoy them until they leave us alone," Calix clarified, earning a few chuckles from the crowd. "But we can't do it alone. We need numbers, support, and a whole lot of luck. And what do we get out of it?" A voice piped up from the back, belonging to a wiry woman whose face was half hidden by a tangle of hair. "Freedom," Seraphis said simply. "A chance to trade without their surveillance breathing down our necks. A chance to actually profit without fearing retribution. Plus," Calix added, "imagine how satisfying it'll be to stick it to them." The room buzzed with murmurs, the kind that suggested people were considering the possibilities. Veckrol leaned forward, his expression serious. "You'll need more than just bravado. You'll need a plan." "Got a few ideas kicking around," Calix said, his gaze sweeping the room. "But we'll need everyone to pitch in." A series of nods followed, hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction. The atmosphere shifted, a palpable sense of camaraderie emerging from the shared acknowledgement of their predicament. "All right," Veckrol said at last. "You've got our attention. What do you need from us?" "Resources," Seraphis replied. "Supplies, intel, anything you can spare that won't leave you vulnerable. And a few good pilots wouldn't hurt," Calix added, grinning. "We're going to need to move fast and hit hard." The group dispersed, each person heading off with a renewed sense of purpose. Calix felt the tide turning, a small but significant step toward something bigger. As they made their way back to their ship, Calix couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, or perhaps it was just the thrill of the chase. Either way, he was ready to see where this new alliance would take them. "Think we can pull this off?" Calix asked Seraphis as they settled into the cockpit. Seraphis considered, their gaze thoughtful. "We've got a long way to go, but it's a start." "That's the spirit," Calix said, firing up the engines. "Let's make some noise." The ship lifted off, blending into the star-studded tapestry of space. Calix felt the weight of their mission settle on his shoulders, but this time it felt a little lighter. They had allies now, a chance, however slim, to fight back. And that was more than he'd had yesterday. "Next stop?" Calix asked, glancing at the star chart. "Back to the depot," Seraphis replied. "We've got a few tricks up our sleeves, and it's time to put them to use." "Right," Calix agreed, setting a course. "Let's show them what we're made of." As they shot through the void, Calix couldn't help but feel that against all odds they just might have a fighting chance. The depot was just as they'd left it, chaotic, bustling, and ripe with opportunities for mischief. Calix and Seraphis slipped back into the fray, using the crowds as cover while they set their plan into motion. They rendezvoused with a small group of their newfound allies, who'd managed to gather a modest cache of supplies and weapons. The plan was simple: disrupt the syndicate's operations, one tiny cut at a time. Death by 1,000 annoyances, as it were. "Ready to kick the hornet's nest?" Calix asked, his grin a mix of reckless optimism and sheer defiance. "Born ready," replied the veteran with the cybernetic arm, hefting a plasma rifle that looked like it could vaporize a small moon. Their first target was a communications hub, a vital node in the syndicate's surveillance network. The plan was to sow enough chaos to buy themselves some breathing room, and maybe, just maybe, inspire others to join their cause. They moved swiftly, each person playing their part with the kind of precision that only desperation could inspire. Calix and Seraphis took point, leading the charge with a blend of bravado and sheer stubbornness. The hub was lightly guarded, the syndicate's overconfidence their greatest weakness. Calix couldn't help but smirk at the irony as they bypassed security protocols with relative ease. As the alarms blared and the first shots were fired, Calix felt a surge of adrenaline. It was a fool's gambit, a mad dash into the lion's den, but damn if it didn't feel good to be fighting back. They moved through the complex with a practiced efficiency, disabling systems and planting charges with a grim determination. The Syndicate's response was swift but uncoordinated, their forces scrambling to contain the unexpected assault. "Keep him busy," Calix shouted over the din, ducking behind cover as a barrage of plasma bolts seared the air. Seraphis was a whirlwind of focus, their movements precise and lethal. "Charges set," they called, their voice cutting through the chaos. "Time to go," Calix replied, signaling the retreat. The team fell back in a controlled retreat, covering each other as they made their way to the extraction point. The explosion that followed was both satisfying and sobering, a reminder of the stakes they were up against. The hub was reduced to a smoking ruin, a testament to their tenacity. As they regrouped, Calix felt the weight of the moment settle over him. They'd struck a blow, but the war was far from over. The Syndicate would regroup, retaliate, and the stakes would only escalate from here. But as he looked around at the faces of those who'd risked everything to stand with him, Calix felt a flicker of hope. They were in this together, come what may. "Well," Calix said, his voice carrying a wry edge, "that wasn't so bad, was it?" "We're still breathing," Seraphis replied, their smile a rare glimmer of warmth. "I'd call that a win," Calix chuckled, clapping a hand on their shoulder. "Then let's see just how far we can take this." As they prepared for whatever came next, Calix couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The Syndicate had underestimated them, and that was their first mistake. It wouldn't be their last. Calix Hargrove had experienced many wake-up calls in his life, most of which involved flashing lights, loud noises, and the acute awareness that someone somewhere wanted him very dead. But waking up strapped to a chair with the acrid tang of burnt circuits in the air, that was new. He blinked through the haze, the world coming into focus one deceptive detail at a time. The room was dark, the kind of dark that swallowed you whole and left you wondering whether you had any business being here in the first place. In front of him, the heavily scarred visage of a Syndicate interrogator loomed, one eye replaced with a glowing orb that hummed with menace. "Morning, sunshine," the interrogator grunted, the words sounding like they'd been dredged up from the bottom of a gravel pit. Calix grinned as best he could, given the restraints and the general sense of impending doom. "If this is how you treat all your guests, I can't imagine your Yelp reviews are too hot." The interrogator didn't seem to appreciate Calix's wit, but then, humor was often lost on those without souls. "You've been busy, Hargrove, poking your nose where it doesn't belong. What can I say? I've got a curious nature. And a face that just begs to be punched, apparently." A curt nod from the interrogator, and the restraints tightened, making it clear that his captor's sense of humor was as underdeveloped as Calix had feared. "You've been sticking it to the Syndicate, making a mess of things." "Just my way of saying thanks for the years of oppression and extortion," Calix replied. "Consider it a public service." The interrogator leaned in, his breath a toxic blend of cheap cigars and worse decisions. "You're going to tell me everything you know. Every contact, every plan, every dirty secret." Calix would have shrugged if he could have. "And here I thought you guys knew everything already. What with your fancy surveillance network and all." A twitch at the corner of the interrogator's mouth. "Oh, we know more than you think, Hargrove. We know about your little alliance, your pathetic attempts at resistance. Really. I had no idea we were that interesting. I mean, we're just a bunch of scrappy underdogs fighting against a galaxy-crushing regime. Totally mundane." The interrogator didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he tapped a console beside him and a holographic display flickered to life, showing a sprawling web of dots and lines. "This, Hargrove, is the network. It sees all, knows all. It's how we maintain order, order." "Right?" Calix scoffed. "A fancy word for keeping everyone under your boot." The interrogator ignored him, continuing his monologue like a villain in a bad holo flick. "You and your friends have been a thorn in our side. And thorns, Mr. Hargrove, need to be removed. Thorns can also cause infections. Just saying." The interrogator's patience seemed to be wearing thin. "You will tell us what we want to know, one way or another." Calix met his gaze with a bravado he didn't entirely feel. Good luck with that. I've been told I've got a head like a brick. The interrogator's smile was a grim parody of amusement. Oh, we have ways of making even bricks talk. As they began their work in earnest, Calix's mind drifted to thoughts of Seraphis and the others. He hoped they were safe, that they were continuing the fight. His resolve only hardened. If the syndicate thought they could break him, they had another thing coming. The session was a blur of pain and defiance, each question met with sarcasm, each threat with a quip. Calix's humor was his armor, his shield against the darkness that threatened to swallow him whole. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" The interrogator mused after what felt like an eternity. "Comes with the territory," Calix wheezed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Stubbornness and stupidity go hand in hand. "Just ask my ex." The interrogator seemed to realize he was getting nowhere fast, which was probably not a first for him. "You could make this easy on yourself, Hargrove. Where's the fun in that?" His captor's patience finally snapped, and Calix was granted a reprieve of sorts when the interrogator stormed out, leaving him alone in the dark. Alone with his thoughts, Calix considered the network's reach, the extent of its surveillance. It was a monstrous thing, vast and omnipresent, a tool of control. But it had one flaw: it couldn't predict human nature. And human nature was what Calix banked on. The unpredictability, the chaos. The same things that made him a pain in the syndicate's ass also gave him hope. As he sat there, bound and battered, Calix made a vow. He wouldn't let this break him. He wouldn't let it end here. Because it wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who longed for freedom, for a chance to breathe without a syndicate leash around their throat. Time passed in a blur, marked only by the occasional visit from his interrogator, who seemed to be working through anger management issues. Each session was a test of Calix's endurance, his resolve. And though his body was weary and his mind frayed, he held on to the flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. In the stillness between sessions, Calix's thoughts turned to escape. He had allies, friends who would come for him. He just had to buy time, stay strong. He had to believe that Seraphis and the others were out there, working, planning. During one particularly brutal session, as the interrogator played his greatest hits of intimidation, Calix found himself laughing. A deep, genuine chuckle that caught even him by surprise. "What's so funny?" The interrogator snarled, clearly unamused. Calix shook his head, the motion dizzying. "Just thinking if this all pans out, I'm going to have one hell of a story to tell." The interrogator's response was something about wiping the smile off Calix's face, but the words were lost in the haze of Calix's resolve. He would not break, not today, not any day. Time dragged on, the days and nights indistinguishable in his windowless cell. Sleep was a luxury, as elusive as a peaceful galaxy. But Calix adapted, as he always had. His mind was a steel trap clinging to the mission, to the hope of a future free from the syndicate's grip. The next time the interrogator returned, Calix was ready to endure, ready to resist. And as the questions began anew, he met them with the same defiant humor that had become his lifeline. Ior's bled into days, and Calix's faith in his friends never wavered. They would come for him. They had to. Not just for his sake, but for everyone's. Because if there was one thing Calix Hargrove believed in, it was that the underdog always had a fighting chance, even in the darkest of Iors. And as he sat there, bruised but unbroken, Calix realized that hope was the one thing the syndicate could never take from him. It was a small, stubborn flame, flickering in the shadows. And as long as it burned, he wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. So as his interrogator returned yet again, Calix met his gaze with the grin of a man who had nothing left to lose. Ready for another round, big guy. The interrogator's expression was a study in frustration, but Calix didn't care. This was his darkest Ior, but it wouldn't be his last. He'd survive this. He had to. Because the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. His mind wandered to the network again, its vast reach and the hubris it represented. It was a tool of oppression, but like all tools, it could be broken, undone. And that was the goal, wasn't it? To unravel the syndicate's web, one strand at a time. The interrogator's voice snapped him back to the present, and Calix braced himself. Another round, another test. But he was ready. He'd endure. Because no matter what they threw at him, he was Calix Hargrove, and he didn't break easily. As the session dragged on, Calix clung to the thought of his allies, their shared mission. They were out there somewhere, fighting for the same cause. And that knowledge was enough to keep him going, even when the darkness threatened to close in. The interrogator's patience wore thin, his methods increasingly desperate. But Calix met each question with a stalwart resistance, his humor a shield that refused to crack. "I've got to hand it to you," Calix said, wincing through the pain. "You guys really know how to make a fellow feel welcome." The interrogator's response was a scowl, but Calix's spirit remained unbroken, because he knew that somewhere out there, his friends were making progress. They were dismantling the Syndicate's grip on the galaxy, one piece at a time. And when they finally came for him, Calix would be ready to rejoin the fight, to take the Syndicate down once and for all. As the session concluded, Calix was left alone once more, alone with his thoughts and his hope. The flicker hadn't died, and neither had he. The fight continued, and Calix Hargrove wasn't going anywhere. Because in the end, the Syndicate's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating their enemies. It was underestimating the power of a stubborn man with nothing left to lose. The interrogator finally left, slamming the door behind him like he was trying to impersonate a thunderstorm. Calix Hargrove was alone again, but solitude had its perks. Like the chance to plan your own escape without someone breathing down your neck, literally and figuratively. Calix shifted in his restraints, trying to ignore the symphony of aches playing a concerto across his body. "Escape plan number 37, he muttered to himself, now with extra desperation. He glanced around the dim room. The Syndicate had spared all expenses when it came to decorating. Bare metal walls, a lone flickering light that gave the room the ambience of a particularly grim tavern, and more surveillance cameras than a paranoid android. Fortunately for Calix, paranoia and technology were two things he could exploit. The network was the Syndicate's pride and joy, a comprehensive surveillance system that would have impressed even the nosiest neighbor. It was also, conveniently, full of holes if you knew where to look, and Calix had spent more time than was healthy studying its weaknesses. He shifted again, this time managing to dislodge a small tool from his sleeve, a tiny, multi-purpose device that had been hidden in his jacket. "Thank you, smuggler's ingenuity," he murmured, working it into the lock of his cuffs. A few tense moments later and they clicked open. Freedom tasted like metal and sweat, but it was freedom nonetheless. Now, he just needed to figure out how to not die in the attempt. The first step was shutting down the cameras. He crawled to the console, the sound of his own ragged breathing louder than thunder. Wires tangled like drunken snakes behind the panel, but Calix had always been good with puzzles, especially when the stakes involved not getting caught. He yanked out a few, rearranged others, and crossed his fingers. The cameras blinked off. "Take that, big brother," he chuckled, despite the burn in his throat. With the cameras out, it was time for part 2 of his master plan: cause a distraction. And by distraction, he meant chaos. A few strategically placed explosives, little gifts he'd stashed around the depot for just such an occasion, would do the trick. He crept to the ventilation shaft, ignoring the metallic taste of fear on his tongue. Nothing like tight spaces to make you question your life choices, he quipped to no one in particular. As he crawled through the shaft, his mind wandered to Seraphiz and the others. They'd be counting on him to create an opening, and if he didn't, well, there'd be a lot of awkward afterlife conversations about why he screwed up. Finally reaching the main network hub, Calix slipped out of the vent like a cat burglar in a B-grade holo flick. The room was a technophile's dream, cables snaking across the floor, consoles blinking with data, and enough equipment to make a hacker weep with joy. Calix got to work, fingers flying over the keyboard. The Syndicate's network was vast, a digital spider web spun to catch any threat. but it was also built on the assumption that no one would be crazy enough to tinker with it from the inside. "Surprise, surprise," he muttered, activating the explosives. The depot was about to get a new skylight. Seconds later, the first explosion rocked the station, followed by another and another. Alarms screamed, red lights flashing like a disco gone wrong. Calix didn't pause to admire his handiwork. He bolted for the exit, dodging confused syndicate goons who looked like they'd been pulled from a bad nap. As he sprinted through the chaos, he saw other captives, humans and alien traders alike, realizing what was happening. He didn't have to shout for them to join the fray. The explosions did all the talking. In the midst of the pandemonium, he spotted 3i, the hulking creature that had once been a formidable enemy, now wielding a steel beam like a makeshift club. "Hey, Calix," 3i's booming voice cut through the noise. "I thought you'd never wake from your beauty nap." Calix grinned, ducking under a wild punch thrown by a syndicate thug. "What can I say? Some of us need our beauty sleep more than others." Together, they fought their way to the hangar where the stolen ship was parked. Seraphiz was already there, keeping cover behind a stack of crates, her blaster picking off the syndicate enforcers trying to cut off their escape. "Nice fireworks display," she quipped as Calix reached her. "I should have brought popcorn." "Next time," Calix replied, jerking his thumb towards the ship. "Let's get the hell out of here before they figure out how to aim." The trio boarded the ship, Calix taking the pilot's seat with Seraphiz at his side and 3i barely squeezing into the back. The engines roared to life, drowning out the sound of pursuit. "Shame we couldn't stay for a drink," Calix mused, guiding the ship out of the hangar and into the void. "I hear the syndicate's hospitality is second to none." 3i snorted, his laughter a deep rumble. "I'll pass. I prefer drinks that don't come with a side of interrogation." As the ship soared into space, leaving the blazing depot behind, Calix allowed himself a moment to breathe. They were free, at least for now, and the syndicate had been dealt a blow. But more importantly, others had seen what was possible. They'd seen that resistance wasn't just a fool's errand. It was a spark that could ignite a rebellion. "What's the plan, Calix?" Seraphiz asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. "Find Vekrul in the asteroid belt," Calix said, adjusting the ship's course. "He owes me a favor, and we're going to need all the help we can get. Plus, he's got the best bootleg liquor this side of the galaxy." "Ah yes, nothing inspires rebellion quite like moonshine," Seraphiz quipped. Calix chuckled, glancing at the stars stretching out before them. They were hurtling into the unknown, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't seem quite so daunting. As long as they kept moving, kept fighting, there was hope. And hope, he reminded himself, was the one thing the syndicate hadn't yet learned how to crush. Asterisk, 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 the ship sailed through the asteroid belt, weaving between rocks that seemed to be playing a game of cosmic dodgeball. Calix piloted with the ease of a man who'd spent more time in the cockpit than in any sensible relationship. "Vekrul better be in a good mood," he muttered, half to himself, half to the universe. "I'm not in the mood to negotiate with a lizard holding a grudge." "Ah, Calix," Seraphiz said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, ever the optimist. 3i rumbled from the back. "I'm just here for the joyride. But if we get shot down, I'm blaming you." "Well, you're only as good as your pilot," Calix retorted, adjusting the trajectory to avoid a particularly ambitious asteroid. "And I'm the best." They arrived at Vekrul's hub, a sprawling mess of salvage haphazardly attached to a hulking asteroid. It hung in space like a drunkard's idea of architecture, all mismatched angles and questionable structural integrity. "Home sweet home," Calix said, flying the ship into one of the docking bays. As they disembarked, the sounds of the bustling black market enveloped them, a cacophony of deals and deceit. Vekrul, a reptilian creature with scales that simulated a bad acid trip, approached them with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Calix, you slippery bastard. I heard you were dead." "I got better," Calix replied, clasping Vekrul's outstretched hand. We need your help and I'd be eternally grateful, grateful enough to pay your tab, Vekrol asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Calyx laughed, a sound that bounced off the metal walls. Let's not get carried away. I'm still me after all. Vekrol waved them towards his office, a cluttered space where chaos went to die. Come on, let's talk business. As they settled into mismatched chairs, Calyx laid out their plan. They needed weapons, allies, and a distraction big enough to send the Syndicate into a tailspin. Vekrol listened, nodding occasionally, his tail flicking in thought. You're playing a dangerous game, Vekrol said finally, his voice a low hiss. But I like dangerous games. Makes life interesting. Then you'll help? Calyx asked, leaning forward. I'll help, Vekrol confirmed. But it won't be easy. The Syndicate's got eyes everywhere, fortunately, Calyx said, grinning like the devil himself. We've got a few tricks up our sleeves. With Vekrol on their side, the plan was set into motion. The black market was a chaotic, living beast, but its inhabitants were no strangers to rebellion. They'd endured the Syndicate's iron grip for too long, and the chance to fight back was a siren's call. And so, the resistance grew, fueled by desperation, determination, and a shared hatred for their oppressors. Weapons were distributed, alliances forged, and Calyx found himself leading a motley crew of misfits who were more than willing to gamble everything for a shot at freedom. As the hubbub of preparation filled the air, Calyx stood to the side, watching it all unfold. The grim reality of their situation was ever present, but for the first time, it didn't seem insurmountable. Seraphis joined him, her expression thoughtful. You think we can really pull this off? Calyx nodded, his eyes scanning the bustling market. If we can't, at least we'll go down in a blaze of glory. Comforting, Seraphis said dryly. You really know how to boost morale. That's why you keep me around, Calyx shot back with a wink. As the hours wore on and the preparations continued, Calyx felt the weight of the coming battle settle over him like a too-tight jacket. But he wore it with pride, knowing that they were on the cusp of something monumental. This was it, the turning point they'd been waiting for. The moment when the underdogs finally stood a chance against the galaxy's bullies, and win or lose, they'd leave a mark that the Syndicate would never forget. And so, with a ship full of rebels and a heart full of defiant hope, Calyx Hargrove prepared to make history. Hope you're ready, he said aloud, to no one and everyone, because this is where the fun begins. The stolen ship glided through the asteroid belt like a drunk trying to navigate a crowded bar. Calyx sat at the controls, fingers dancing over the buttons like a seasoned DJ at a club with questionable hygiene standards. Behind him, Seraphis and 3i were running through the plan one more time. They were about to pull off a heist that would make the great Galactic Bank robbery look like a shoplifting incident. Remind me again why we're doing this, 3i grumbled, his voice a guttural rumble that made the ship vibrate like one of those novelty massage chairs that never quite worked right. Because, Calyx drawled, I've got a reputation to uphold, and because the Syndicate needs a lesson in humility. Preferably the kind that comes with explosions. Seraphis arched an eyebrow, a gesture that looked impressive given the lack of eyebrows on her particular species. And you're sure you can handle the network? Calyx leaned back, stretching his arms. Oh, I've got this. The network's like a bad ex, predictable, full of holes and begging to be exploited. 3i grunted. Just don't blow us up in the process. No promises. The plan was simple as these things went. They'd infiltrate the mainframe of the Syndicate's surveillance system, exploit its weaknesses, and bring the whole thing crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. Calyx had spent countless sleepless nights poring over schematics, memorizing every digital nook and cranny. If anyone could pull this off, it was him. The ship docked at an unassuming platform disguised as a storage facility for off-brand cereal. It was one of Vekrol's many hideouts, and its bland exterior did a good job of concealing the chaos inside. As they disembarked, Vekrol approached them, his scales shimmering in a way that suggested excitement or indigestion. You ready to make history, Calyx? History, infamy, what's the difference? Calix replied, grinning like a gambler on a winning streak. Inside the station, the mood was tense but hopeful. The ragtag group of rebels, mercenaries, outlaws, and a few disgruntled syndicate insiders were all gathered, itching for a fight. Calix took a moment to address them, stepping up onto a crate to be seen. "All right, listen up," he began, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "The syndicates had us under their boot for too long. Today we kick back. Hard, their network, it's a joke, and I'm the punchline." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, though whether they were laughing with him or at him was anyone's guess. "We'll hit them where it hurts, their eyes and ears. Once the surveillance is down, they're blind. And we fight. We fight like hell." Seraphis sidled up next to him, her presence a silent show of support. "And if we fail, Calix said, pausing for effect, "then we can at least say we tried, and trying beats waiting to die any day." With that, he hopped off the crate, the crowd scattering to prepare. Seraphis gave him a nod, the kind that said both "good job" and "try not to screw up." In the heart of the makeshift command center, Calix set to work on the console, plugging in his multi-purpose device. The screens flickered to life, a mess of code and data spilling across them. "All right, you beautiful disaster," he murmured, fingers flying over the keys. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." The network was vast, a labyrinth of security measures designed to keep intruders out, but it had been built by people who'd never met anyone like Calix, people who underestimated the power of human insanity. 3i watched from the side, a skeptical look in his third eye. "You sure this is gonna work?" Calix didn't look up. "Sure." "No." "Confident." "Absolutely." Just as he found the backdoor he'd been searching for, the station's alarms blared to life, red lights painting the room in a hellish glow. The syndicate had caught wind of their little operation. They were coming, and they were bringing hell with them. "Looks like they've crashed the party," Seraphis said, her blaster already in hand. Calix grinned, hacking into a nearby terminal and flooding it with commands. "Good. I hate parties." As the first wave of syndicate enforcers stormed the station, Calix initiated the virus he'd been working on for months. It was a masterpiece, a digital plague designed to infect the network and spread like wildfire. Within moments, the screens in the command center went dark, a cascade of failures rippling through the system. "Surprise, surprise," Calix muttered, satisfied with the chaos unfolding across the galaxy. The network's cameras blinked out, their electronic eyes blinded, leaving the syndicate groping in the dark. The sound of gunfire echoed through the station as the rebels engaged the syndicate forces. It was a cacophony of violence, a fitting soundtrack to their rebellion. Calix turned to Seraphis, a mad glint in his eyes. "Now or never, my friend. Let's make sure they remember this day." She nodded, her expression grim but determined. "Let's see how they handle flying blind." Together they joined the fray, blasters raised, as the station erupted into pandemonium. The syndicate's one-iron grip was slipping, their carefully maintained order unraveling at the seams. Calix ducked behind a crate, firing off shots at the advancing forces. "How's that for a punchline?" he yelled over the din, his voice tinged with manic glee. 3i was a whirlwind of destruction, swinging a pipe with deadly precision. "I think they got the memo." The fight raged on, a chaotic ballet of laser fire and explosions. Calix lost track of time, the adrenaline surging through him like a drug. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but somehow, through sheer audacity, they were holding their ground. It was a dance of desperation and defiance, rebels fighting not just for their lives but for an idea. The idea that they could be more than the syndicate's puppets, that they could chart their own course among the stars. As the battle reached a fever pitch, a sudden lull fell over the station. The syndicate forces hesitated, their confusion palpable. Without the network to guide them, they were lost, floundering in the chaos they'd once commanded. Calix seized the moment, rallying his makeshift army. "Push them back. Show them what it means to be free." His words were met with a renewed vigor, the rebels charging forward with a fierce resolve. They fought with the desperation of those who had nothing to lose and everything to gain, carving a path through the syndicate's ranks. Calix fought like a man possessed, his movements fueled by a burning need for vindication. He was more than just a cog in the machine. He was a wrench, jamming the gears, and he relished every moment of it. With the Syndicate's forces in disarray, the rebels gained ground, driving them back. Calix found himself in the thick of the fight, a blur of motion and intent. The tide was turning, the Syndicate's once unassailable fortress crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. Calix, Seraphis, and 3i fought side by side, a triumvirate of chaos and rebellion. And as the dust settled, it became clear that they had achieved the impossible. They had shattered the Syndicate's grip, not just on the station but across the galaxy. The network was down, its eyes gouged out, its ears deafened. The galaxy was a mess, sure, but it was their mess. And for the first time in living memory, humanity could breathe freely. As the remaining Syndicate forces retreated, Calix stood among the ruins, breathless and triumphant. He turned to Seraphis, his grin a mix of exhaustion and elation. "Well," he said, panting slightly, "that's one way to start a revolution." She laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I'll drink to that." 3i lumbered over, his makeshift weapon resting on one shoulder. "You did it, you mad bastard." Calix shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the pounding of his heart. "I had help." Together they surveyed the aftermath, a silence falling over the station. It was the silence of possibility, the kind that comes when a new chapter begins. Calix felt a weight lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the thrill of the unknown. They had taken the first step and there was no turning back. "What's next?" 3i asked, his voice rumbling with curiosity. Calix looked out at the stars, the endless expanse of the void. "We keep moving, we keep fighting, until the galaxy is ours." Seraphis nodded, sharing his resolve. "And what about the Syndicate?" Calix's grin was wicked, a promise of things to come. "They'll wish they'd never heard of us." As they regrouped, the rebels emerged from the shadows, their faces etched with a newfound determination. They had tasted freedom and there was no going back. Calix gathered them, a leader born of necessity. "We've done the impossible. Now we make it count. We build something better. Something that lasts." The crowd cheered, a ragged, joyful sound that echoed through the station. They were a motley crew, a disparate collection of species and backgrounds, but they were united by a single purpose: hope. With the network dismantled and the galaxy thrown into chaos, humanity's freedom was secured. It was a triumph of human ingenuity and spirit, a testament to their resilience. And as Calix stood amid the aftermath, he knew that this was just the beginning. The beginning of a new era, one where they held the reins. The Syndicate had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Calix Hargrove had set the galaxy ablaze, and he intended to keep it burning. Because in the end, it wasn't just about freedom. It was about proving that, against all odds, they could rise above. And rise they would into the unknown, where adventure awaited and the stars beckoned. "All right," Calix said, turning to his friends. "Let's see what trouble we can get into next." And with that they stepped into the void, ready to carve out their place in the cosmos. Armed with hope, humor, and a healthy dose of madness, they faced the future with open arms. Because if there was one thing Calix had learned, it was that the universe was a big place, full of possibilities, full of dreams, and damn it, they were going to claim them all. Calix Hargrove stood amidst the rubble, a smile on his face and a blaster in his hand. The station was quieter now, the chaos of battle replaced by the awkward silence that follows a surprise victory. Rebels and former captives milled about, some tending to the wounded, others staring into the distance as if expecting the Syndicate to come charging back with an apology and a peace offering. Fat chance. "Well, folks," Calix declared, gesturing broadly to the mess they'd made, "welcome to the newly liberated disaster zone. Please keep your arms and legs inside the ride at all times, because we're about to rebuild this mess into a slightly less messy mess." 3i, ever the optimist, grunted as he sat down heavily on a crate that was miraculously still intact. "As long as we don't put me in charge of interior decorating, we'll be fine." Seraphis crossed her arms, her face displaying the kind of skepticism usually reserved for salesmen and politicians. "So what's the plan, Captain Chaos? We've got a galaxy in shambles and a syndicate that's probably plotting our very painful demise as we speak." Calix tapped his chin, pretending to ponder deeply. "Well, first I thought I'd open a cafe. You know, lattes in hell, something like that." Three Eye snorted, his third eye rolling in exasperation. "You'd poison half the customers and start a war with the other half." "Ah, but think of the Yelp reviews," Calix retorted, looking around. "Seriously, though, first order of business is to make sure we don't get resyndicated. That means keeping this place under our control and making sure those bastards can't regroup. We'll turn this dump into a safe haven for anyone tired of the syndicate's crap." Seraphis nodded, already lost in thought. "We need allies. Ships, supplies, and people who can shoot straight and keep their mouths shut." "Good luck with that last part," Calix said, shaking his head. "People love to run their mouths. It's like a universal law or something." Three Eye leaned back, his usual skepticism tinged with a hint of hope. "So, how do we start? I mean, without a network, it's not like we can just send out a Join Us newsletter." Calix grinned, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "You'd be surprised what you can do with a little ingenuity and a lot of duct tape. First, we get the comms up and running. No more eavesdropping from the syndicate. We tell everyone that the galaxy is under new, slightly less incompetent management." Vekrol shuffled over, his expression a perfect blend of excitement and digestive distress. "And how, exactly, do you plan to handle the inevitable backlash when the syndicate realizes we've hijacked their party?" "Simple," Calix said, his grin widening. "We just make sure they can't find us." Vekrol raised an eyebrow, or would have had he possessed any. "Hiding an entire station isn't exactly easy, you know." Calix waved a hand dismissively. "We just need to make it look like a giant piece of space junk, which, frankly, isn't too far from the truth. Some camouflage, a little engineering magic, and a whole lot of wishful thinking. It'll be fine." Seraphis rolled her eyes, her tone dry as a Martian desert. "And when that fails, then we throw a big, explosive going-away party," Calix replied, gesturing to the debris. "I mean, who needs an escape plan when you can just blow up the evidence?" Three Eye chuckled, shaking his head. "You really are a mad bastard, aren't you?" "Mad?" "Maybe," Calix said, his smile fading into a more serious expression. "But we've got a chance here, a real chance to make a difference. For once, we get to be the ones calling the shots, not just scrambling to stay alive." The others nodded, a shared determination settling over them. Despite their differences, the ragtag group had become something more. A family, in the loosest sense of the word. A family with a penchant for violence and questionable life choices, but a family nonetheless. "Let's get to work then," Calix said, clapping his hands together. "We've got a galaxy to liberate, and I refuse to do it sober." With that, the group dispersed, each member taking on a task in the grand, chaotic plan that would either save humanity or doom them to an eternity of syndicate rule. And honestly, it was a toss-up as to which was more likely. Calix set about restoring the station's communication systems, confident that he could cobble together something serviceable from the wreckage. If there was one thing he'd learned over the years, it was that the universe loved a good comeback story. And if anyone was going to give the syndicate a run for their money, it was going to be him. Hours stretched into days, and the station slowly started to resemble something other than a post-apocalyptic nightmare. With each repaired system and each secured corridor, the rebels took another step closer to their goal of independence. It was slow, grueling work, but it was progress. And progress was a hell of a lot better than the alternative. As Calix worked, he couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the people around him. Despite everything they'd been through, they kept fighting, kept pushing forward. It was enough to restore his faith in humanity, or at least his faith that they were too stubborn to give up. One evening, as he tinkered with a particularly stubborn piece of tech, Seraphis joined him, a question in her eyes. "Do you really think we have a shot at this?" she asked, her voice low and serious. Calix paused, considering his response. Honestly, I don't know, but what I do know is that we can't go back to the way things were. We've come too far for that, so even if the odds are crappy, we've still got to try. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Then we'll try. And if nothing else, we'll go out with a bang. Calix chuckled, returning to his work. That's the spirit. Now hand me that spanner, would you? This thing isn't going to fix itself. Together they continued their task, their conversation punctuated by the sounds of tinkering and the occasional curse. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes a start was all you needed. As the days turned into weeks, the rebels began to establish a semblance of order. The station became a hub of activity, a refuge for those seeking freedom, and a base for those determined to fight for it. Word spread of the uprising, drawing in new allies and reinforcements. With the syndicate's network still in shambles, their communications in disarray, the rebels had a rare opportunity to strike without fear of immediate retaliation. It was a delicate balance, maintaining the element of surprise while building their strength. Calix, for his part, spent most of his time coordinating efforts and making sure the station's defenses were up to snuff. The last thing they needed was an impromptu syndicate visit, and he wasn't about to let their hard work go to waste. One evening, as he surveyed the bustling station from an elevated catwalk, Three-Eye joined him, leaning against the railing. "You know," Three-Eye said, his tone conversational, "it's starting to feel like home. A really messy, dysfunctional home." Calix grinned, nodding. "Yeah. I never thought I'd find myself caring about a place like this. But it's ours, you know. We made something out of nothing, and that's not something the syndicate can take away." Three-Eye chuckled, a rare sound from the usually gruff man. "When this all started, I thought you were nuts. Now." "Well, I'm not saying you're not nuts, but maybe that's what we needed." "Like I said," Calix replied, his voice tinged with humor, "the universe loves a good comeback story." Together they watched the scene below, the hum of activity a comforting reminder of the progress they'd made. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. As the days continued to pass, the rebels grew stronger, their resolve only strengthened by the challenges they faced. Each victory, no matter how small, was a reminder of what they were fighting for. Calix found himself reflecting on everything that had brought him to this point. The struggles, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, one thing had remained constant, the unyielding spirit of the people around him. For all their flaws and imperfections, humanity had a way of rising to the occasion, of defying the odds and proving that they were more than the sum of their parts. It was a testament to their resilience, their ability to adapt and overcome. And as Calix stood among them, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They had achieved the impossible, and they weren't done yet. There was work to be done, battles to fight, and a future to secure. But they had a chance now, a real chance to make a difference. With the syndicate in disarray and the galaxy in upheaval, the path ahead was uncertain. But for Calix and his allies, that uncertainty was a challenge, not a deterrent. They would face whatever came their way with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that the universe was a big, unpredictable place. And sometimes, the best way to navigate it was with a smirk and a middle finger raised high. "All right," Calix said, turning to his friends with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Let's see what trouble we can get into next." And with that, they stepped into the unknown, ready to carve out their place in the cosmos. Armed with hope, humor, and a touch of madness, they faced the future with open arms. Because if there was one thing Calix knew, it was that the universe was full of possibilities, full of dreams, and damn it, they were going to claim them all.